Okay, I'd like to call the Joint Village Board and Finance and Personnel meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Kodowski,
Here.
Allison Williams,
Here.
Gary Paul,
Here.
Chris Herbal,
Here.
Jay Krieger,
Here.
Steve Kabacki,
Here.
Tracy Flukie.
Here. And Chris, you want to call your Finance and Personnel Committee?
Oh, am
together?
I doing that? Okay.
Yep. Just call
What's that?
call your Finance and Personnel
Yep,
meeting.
I'd like to call to order what are we, November 10th, Village Finance and Personnel Committee. Roll call, please.
Chris Herbal,
Here.
Allison Williams,
Here.
Tracy Flukie,
Here.
Allison Burnett,
Here.
and Tom Selk.
Here.
Please stand for the pledge.
Flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And please remember our men and women throughout the world in uniform, and tomorrow is Veterans Day, so think of that if you have a chance. Okay, I have no changes to the agenda.
Move as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Number 5 is the 2021 Village Budget Review. Now, before we start, I have just a few comments that I would like to say. First of all, everybody knows this has been a tough budget because of the whole COVID issue and the loss of revenues, but first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to thank Greg Wenholz, our finance director. He had to juggle the 2020 budget, which we had over $500,000 in lost revenue. He had to figure out how to make the numbers work with lost revenue for the 2021 budget, and all that in the middle of doing software update and the computers. So he's been pretty busy in his office. Second of all, I'd like to thank all the department heads. We asked them to give us a budget where they would just, whatever they would ask for at a normal year. And with that, we were at a $1.3 million deficit. So we had meetings with the department heads, and some tough decisions were made, but everybody was pretty willing to make them, and we made the budget work. A couple of the needs that we did get, we had a structure change in public safety, which was recommended by the Fitch study. We were able to add a mechanic position without affecting the budget due to the different allocations of the wages. We did not add a full-time HR director because we're in the process of getting the new village manager on board, and they will be tasked with figuring that out. We did put in $50,000 to contract some of the HR needs for 2021. One of the things that we did hear from the residents is they did not want any of their services cut. So we are cutting no services, and they also sent a strong message to me, do not defund the public safety department. We didn't do any of that. So we're moving forward with the hired clerk position. That position will no longer be elected due to the referendum we had in the spring. There are many needs we have in the future. We have to be mindful of mostly it's staff needs. And this whole COVID issue has pretty much showed us that we do have great staff that works very, very hard, but there are some staff needs that we have, especially with us growing. Our development is really going strong, even in the midst of COVID, and we want to continue to spend the village taxpayers' dollars very wisely. All of that being said, to balance the 2021 budget, we do have a slight tax increase, and we are also using some of our reserve, which a lot of communities are using their reserve for the 2020 budget because of the revenues being down. So that was kind of a high-level introduction, but again, Greg, thank you so much for everything that you've done with this budget. It was tough.
All right, well, thank you very much for the kind words. I want to echo the comments to the board, and what I'll do is, some of you are new to this, and I'll walk through our process But I first want to acknowledge my peers and the department heads and other leaders here who work on the budgets. Late summer, early fall is extremely busy time during the year for various departments, yet they don't put any less effort into the budget. They're passionate about their departments and what they want to do moving forward. But they're a great crew to work with, understanding, patient. We've done a good job over the last few years, especially getting more long-term capital planning thought processes out there, so we can, give and take a little bit within our departments and to help other departments out. So I thank you, all of you, for your time and efforts to help make this possible. So, and being patient through the process and understanding as we're dealing with a lot of challenges this year. So to echo what Mary said, I think it's important to understand the process, and then I'll go through some of those highlights as well. So for me, this budget process, it really starts about early June, believe it or not. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work that starts, and then throughout the summer, preparing for a mid-August kickoff meeting with staff. And then from there, they have about a month or so to get their budgets put in, and then we consolidate. And as Mary said earlier, we're about 1.3 million in the hole to start. And so we start having meetings, we start talking about the projects and priorities and all of that, and we get to a point where we present to you and discuss all of the results. So we went from 1.3 down to 325,000 in the hole. This is not an easy decision. Other communities across the state are in similar situations. We're seeing use of fund balance and tax rate increases at varying levels. Some doing it, like Mary said, some taking the reserves this year and then not so much next year. We were able to, mostly through the, if you remember, the health insurance premium forgiveness, that really helped us balance this year. So I suspect other communities are doing similar type items in other areas to help balance next year's budget. But overall, most communities are hitting probably both of those factors to balance their budgets or to get through. The other challenge is not always great news. It's what's coming for 2022. Revised state estimates came in higher than most people thought for 2021, but the thought now is definitely that in 2022 we would see some reductions. Barring some great results in 2021, obviously there's a lot that could happen. So there's all those factors that come into play with a lot of the decisions that were made this year. It wasn't easy. Projects are put off to consolidate with other projects and things like that. So some of those highlights, again, I think it's important to understand, being able to add a position. We talked about the HR position being the priority, and it felt like the best decision to start was doing contracted services to see what do we really need, what do we really want. So we have money for that. And then the ability to bring in another mechanic for public works is huge. And as Mary said, that was cost neutral, which means there's a certain level of cost that we contract out that we feel we don't have to contract anymore by having someone in-house and allocating some of that cost to the utilities for the amount of time and effort that's put on those vehicles. So that was a good add. The other big add was a market revaluation for next year. We typically have faced doing these every 3 to 5 years. That's $70,000. There's just no way around it. There's a lot of work, a lot of time. So that will happen next year. That will help our market valuation and then ultimately help our tax rate. We were able to maintain the same level of funding for road repair. So our mill pave program, which is crucial to a lot of the residents. They don't want to see anything bad on the roads. We'll be able to maintain that same level of service there. And all of our other services that we talked about, maintaining the same level of services. And also there's a little bit of money given to different areas for some capital projects. It may not be everything intended, but it's something. We're able to at least give them something to do. There are a lot of projects in the pipeline anyway to keep everyone busy, so we'll be moving forward with a lot of things next year as well. So from here, what we typically do is we go left to right through the book. We're going to start with the general fund. We have general fund, we have special revenue funds, we have debt service fund, capital projects, and then the utilities and our internal service funds, which we'll talk about as we go along. The primary budget is the general fund. We look at where we want to be with taxes, we allocate first priority is to debt service. So we have to cover our debt service needs. That's the first dollars out of our tax revenue. And then from there, we look at the capital projects and then our general fund. So that's how this page number 1 kind of is determined. When you look at the levy split, how do we determine what goes where? Debt service, number 1 priority, have to pay those commitments. So as we talked about, we're looking at a 2% tax rate increase, which is 11 cents. And if you turn to page number 2, for the average taxpayer, it's $18. So a 2% increase to an average taxpayer is $18. I know everyone's at varying levels. My son got $20 from the neighbor to cut his grass once. So when you put that in perspective, that's not a bad deal for the amount of service that you're going to get. I have listed on page 2 kind of what does your tax bill pay for, and you can see what you spend your tax dollars on broken out by departments. Snow removal is less than $10 to the average taxpayer for the whole year. Street lighting, $25. So you go down this list, there's a lot of other areas in here. So I think it's really important that the residents understand that we don't take it lightly to raise taxes, but when you break down what you're getting for services, we'll compare our services to anyone in this area, dollar for dollar. Hands down, I think we're the best. So then we have some hierarchy charts in here that just walks through our operations, our committees, and things like that. Not much has changed there. Public safety has their own chart. They've done some modifications, which we've talked about, I think, over the year in different areas. But overall, our staffing levels are the same, all adding a mechanic. So from there, what we'll do is we'll go through the dollars and cents, the revenues of the general fund, and then expenses, and then by department. We approve the fund in total. We don't need to approve each department in total. We do the fund in total, and then we'll get to the other funds. So if there aren't any questions, we'll move forward. Okay, so as we said, the general fund, we're looking at dipping the reserves $325,000. Our fund balance policy right now states that we need to maintain 20% reserves. What does that mean? So you look at what are your reserve levels and you compare that to the expenditures of the general fund. So that means we need to have a fund balance at least 20% of our prior year, if you will, final audited number, general fund expenditures. We're sitting at 2019 at the end of the year about 34%. Using $325,000 puts us down about 31%. So it seems like a big dollar, but it's enough to help us balance, but it's not enough that I don't think the rating agencies are going to really balk too much at that. Even though we're at 20, our bond council recommends not going below 25. So we still have a pretty good cushion there. So that would be kind of the primary note on page 7. Our revenue splits and our expenditure splits in the graphs on pages 8 and 9 are very similar year over year. We spend usually the same amount of money on personnel, and each department's roughly the same. Our operation costs are pretty steady, and pretty, supplies and all the other cost categories pretty much stay flat. There's not a lot of wiggle room in there to move and cut. So those have been maintained pretty well. So to walk through the general fund revenues, the other key highlights here, state aids, like I said, for the most part, we're looking at intergovernmental, we're down 15,000, so that's pretty good. We have some aids that are up and down, and that depends on other factors that are actual reporting numbers, like expenditure restraint is based on prior year's spend. So we don't have a lot of control. It's money given to communities that don't raise their expenditure levels very high. License permitting, fines, forfeitures, usually fairly steady, that ebbs and flows. We didn't really touch much there. Charges for services, again, some areas we feel will be down, still have a COVID impact into next year to some extent, some park and rec programming, things like that probably the first good half of the year might still be down. There's a corresponding drop in expenses there as well. Oh, the other big one is room tax. Room tax I'm projecting down 100,000 from last year's budget. The Room Tax Commission has projections low through May, but they are projecting numbers back in summer to start coming right back up. And for us, the summer months and the fall months are where we get the vast majority of our room tax. There's not a lot. There are some shows in the area in January through April, but not really necessarily bringing in a lot of hotels. Some sports things, the women, the girls basketball, I think that's here and things like that might bring in some hotel. And those things could still potentially happen as well. So overall revenues are down $308,000. Interest income and room tax make up half of that. And then we've got other areas of charges for services, which is just either programs or other areas where we're not going to get the revenue that we normally get. So public safety, for example, there haven't been as many events where they go and provide police service for, which we get reimbursed for, but then again, there's an offsetting drop in cost as well. So any questions on general fund revenues?
You're assuming that the park and rec is gonna come flying back.
Park and rec is kind of a, if we put down revenues, we put down expenses a little bit, so it's kind of wash it. So if, we don't really know, and Rex can speak to that better, but we're trying to be a little bit conservative. We're hoping that things bounce back quickly, but there were definitely drops in some programs that, participation levels and then corresponding cost to that and revenues. So those, if we don't have a program, we don't have the personnel, the part-time people we hire, and then we don't have the program revenue. But for the most part, if the revenue went down, we dropped the expense down a little bit as well, just to kind of keep it smooth.
Okay.
So.
Greg, most of everything you've got here in revenues makes sense. You've dialed back where you need to dial back, and you've held where you think we're going to get back to normal. One question I had, though, was on court penalties and costs. So that's something that we budgeted at 320, and it looks like we've had a downward trend over the last several years. 313 and 218, 230 and 219, 184 forecast for 2020. And then we move it back up to 320. But it looks like we've got is there a rationale or reasoning for that?
That has somewhat of an offsetting cost to it as well. So there is a jail fee costs and other costs that we have to pay the county that would correspond to this. I'm projecting that the uncollectible balance, there is an end of the year audit entry, and I'm trying not to get too complicated here, that I have to true up the uncollectibles, which are kind of behind the scenes with LifeQuest, our billing services, and that I'm projecting that to be next year to be an entry to drive up the revenues. It's hard to explain what that all means. Just it ebbs and flows with activity. It's almost counter. So if numbers are down, that entry is going to bring it up because there's more uncollectibles out there, and then we write them off, and vice versa. So. Yeah, that's a tricky one because it's hard to predict. I think the numbers overall have started to come back up with criminal activity. So it was down in March, April, May, and can't hold those people down too long. So, but yeah, you're right. That's one of those areas where it's, if I bring that down, then I'll bring down some of the expenses too. So we just kind of watch and see where it goes.
Okay, thank you.
So then we get into expenditures, and we'll get into each of the departments, but you can just see the list of departments in total, and then just by cost lines as well. For the most part, the big change for 2021 is we're offering only an HSA health plan. That came to the board for approval. That's cheaper to the village, so that's why you'll see overall, and you'll see there's a health insurance and a health insurance HSA. Well, the health insurance was the PPO plan, so therefore we don't have it, there's no cost. So in total, it's down over $100,000 because that PPO plan is more expensive to the village. So that's why you're seeing, it's kind of a weird switch there, but you'll see it in every department. And then what I do is I just go through current personnel and what people have right now. Open enrollment's still open till the end of this week, so I don't really have a good feel. There's a lot that isn't done yet, so I don't know who's going to stay on, who's not. And then throughout the year, we project any open positions that may exist or whatever. I always assume they're going to take health insurance, and the last couple of years, there's a few people here and there that don't take it, so that's a big savings to us.
So I had noticed that in like the individual budgets, especially park maintenance and then IT, there was no health insurance in there, and I'm assuming they aren't taking it, and that's why it was not listed in there?
There's two lines. So the health insurance
Yep,
line
and then the
is PPO
HSA.
plan. No
but-
one's on the PPO plan next year, so that's going to be zero.
Right,
That doesn't mean they're not taking, then it's the HSA. And then
right.
if they're on, and then there might have been some changes throughout, so maybe somebody was budgeted to be on it, and then they didn't, or they switched at last year's open enrollment. So there were a whole bunch of people that switched last year after the budget meeting was done. So I don't have those numbers until open enrollment's complete.
Okay, so then like for park maintenance where health insurance is not listed at all, and I understand the change from PPO to the HSA and the line items changing that way, but I didn't see health insurance listed in there at all or in the IT detail. So I didn't know if I missed it in there or if they had not taken health
I see
insurance
what
at
you
all.
did. I'm guessing in the totals, it's there and the row is hidden.
Okay,
So I will unhide the row because they probably didn't have any last year.
okay,
So I'll make a note,
thank you.
and I can look that up and tell you
Okay.
what it is. So the next section.
Greg, I think it also should be noted that the employees are paying nothing to the HSA at this point, which I think is a good thing at this point. But most places, slowly, you end up having to pay something for that. But I think this is a great first step. But I think it should be noted that at this point, there is nothing being paid to that
Okay. Yep.
by the employee.
So the pages 15 through 21 kind of slice and dice the numbers that got us from that 1.3 million deficit to 325. So we had a tax increase. We had final estimates come in from the state for their shared aids, reducing some of the projects that were listed out there that we would have allocated dollars to a different fund, and now they come back to the general fund. And then on the expenditure side, we had originally put in hiring an HR person, moved that to a contracted, so that saves $40,000. And then there's a list of items in here. If anybody has any specific questions, there was a request for a full-time fire inspector that was put off. Some of the bigger ones, there were some traffic control barriers requested that came out. Again, the idea was we'll look at next year, we'll look at potentially if we have surpluses next year a chance, then those are things that we could look at the end of next year, bring it back in. But unfortunately, there, to get to where we needed to be, there were some tough decisions that had to be made.
So
said-
Greg, oh, go ahead, Tracy.
I just had a question on wage increases for any employees. It appeared there was like 2%. Is that what's budgeted
Yes.
for wages? And it's basically cost of living is the 2% based on?
Correct.
Okay,
And what I've found also, I've been having meetings through the COVID with, sponsored by the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, and it's a lot of finance directors throughout the state have been meeting. And most communities that are doing wage increases are matching any union increases. They did not want their employees who weren't in a union to not get something, so they're matching what the corresponding union's getting. And that's,
is that what this is?
I don't have the final public safety union because they're based on comparable, so I don't have all of those yet, but that's right in the ballpark of where they'll be. So.
Great, thank you.
And then my question, so I know we talked a lot about the HR position. Did we ever decide, and I'm 100% on board, I know tough decisions had to be made and I don't want to change the direction. But I think it's important to note that once we get a village manager on board and everything, and I know now I'll be part of finance and personnel, we look at what level of HR person we want, because you can get a generalist in that $50,000 range, and I know that doesn't include benefits and there's other costs associated with that. But I think it's just something that once we kind of get a manager and we really start to figure out what level, what the hierarchy would be and everything. Because if you're looking at a director, that's a huge expense. But if your village manager is going to oversee them and kind of also share, it's not as large of an expense as we might think. Again, I know that's not including benefits and all that other stuff, but I think that'll be important in the beginning of the year that we kind of look at. Because I know what I started at, and I know what you can get people at, and you can get some decent employees in that range. So just wanted to make that note. But again, I agree with the path we're going, just something I wanted to kind of get out there.
Yeah, we had those internal discussions about that. That was part of why we decided to go with the 50,000 for contracted, because the new village manager that we get can help to figure out exactly what we do need. There's some of the standard importing type information that some of the staff is doing, and do they keep doing that? And then we don't need a director, a lot of different questions, so that's why we decided to go with just the contracted.
Yeah, and I agree. And when you don't have an HR department, it's difficult to figure out what you need. So I think having the new village manager to kind of really start to assess, to figure out what level, you'd hate to bring in someone at a higher level, find out you needed lower level, or vice versa, hire someone at a lower level and find out you need higher level. So again, I agree with the path.
Yeah.
Just maybe something that once we know what we want, maybe we don't have to wait until 2021 to hire. We could take those contracted funds and maybe put it, depending on what we need. That's all.
Right.
And how COVID goes and, the rest of the world and everything else. So just a lot to consider. But that's all.
Sure.
Greg, on the intergovernmental, I understand that obviously the state here in January can have an impact on that. Is it thought that if it does get lowered, that then we're just going to be taking more out of our reserves to balance the budget? Or have you done any playing with these numbers to see what's absolutely we're going to get, what's something the state might change? It's going to go plus down, up, have you done any looking at that to see what impact that might have on our reserves?
Yeah, so that was a question I actually asked Kurt Wojcinski at our last meeting. Was I'm really surprised that these shared aid numbers came in as high as they did, and quickly a lot of echoes on the meeting. And he said we all were, and I said, well, how confident can I be? We talked about January on doing a budget amendment bill. He said he had talked to some legislators. He didn't name names, but he said you should feel about 95% confident that that won't be touched. He said they fully understand that these communities are budgeting to these dollars, and that if they don't get them, they're going to have to make some cuts, and they didn't feel that was very fair. He said, however, don't keep your hopes up for 2022. That was kind of the message. But he felt fairly confident that that was not going to happen. Mary and I talked about this. I think that's where something like that contracted number might be the one of the things that we have to hold off on if we don't get the aids that they're projecting that we get. Or you're right, we have to kind of go back to the drawing board and look. Hopefully room tax bounces back better than we thought, but who knows? And that's what we did all of this year. So we would just have to play with that throughout the year and see where we're at. Who knows? You could, if somebody leaves, maybe you hold the position open a month longer than you wanted to, or something to save some extra money. So there's not a lot, but we'll just have to manage through that. But I think that's the contracted was one. We'll know right away if they do something instantly, and then we can manage. But he said be about 95% confident that they're going to hold to that, because they fully understand people are putting it in their budgets, and especially communities that are using fund balance and other things like that, it would really put them in a bind. So
Okay, thank you.
Greg, what is that miscellaneous under intergovernment state aids? It's a $43,000 number, page 17.
Video service provider aid. I hadn't had that estimate in there yet. So that's for like cable TV, video service. It's a newer one. You may not be familiar with. That's a newer shared aid. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very good.
And that's one of those that could be 20,000 next year. So it's one of those variables.
A new line item.
Yeah. New line item. Okay, without any other questions, what we'll do is we'll go through department by department. We start with our general government, which is kind of all the administrative side of the house, and then we get into public works, sanitation, park recreation, and then economic development. So I kind of just leave this, we go through, I'll say village board administration, and if there's any questions or comments. Again, the big things here to note are just the switch in the health insurance between those two line items, 2% raise across the board, and then I think I brought up a lot of things. So village board administration has an increase of $48,500. That's the contracted services for HR. So then if you don't have any questions, then we just move to the next one, and we'll just kind of page through it. So I'll start with Village Board Administration. Like I said, contracted services is the one big piece of change there.
What page?
Page 22 and 23. So on
Okay,
page
that's what I
22,
thought.
sorry. No questions, and we go to Municipal Court, which is page 24 and 25. That is fairly status quo as well. Page 26 and 27 is listed as Clerk Treasurer. That obviously will become clerk officially next year. But it doesn't change anything really with the personnel per se that are in there. Or much of the, this is mostly clerk related anyway. A lot of the adjustments that you see in any of these departments are either just fine tuning to actual trends, or they might have a note in there that explains why they dropped. Page 28, 29 is Village Assessor. Big change there is the $70,000 for the, it's called subscription to CoStar, but that's what's used to do the market evaluation.
Greg, one question on that. Is that ongoing then? Or is that just this 1 year when we're doing the re-eval?
The 1 year.
Okay.
They've also added a smaller annual maintenance or annual fee with this CoStar program, which will hopefully help alleviate the need. It's kind of an ongoing then versus this big influx of cash every 3 to 5 years. Maybe that influx of cash is 40,000 instead, and you kind of chip at it as you go along.
So next year in the budget, it won't be 70,000, it might be a lower amount
Next year
for
wouldn't
an
be 70
ongoing
at all.
type
It's
of.
just, yeah, it's like a 5,000 maybe annual maintenance or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thanks.
The idea is to smooth that out, so we don't have these big jumps. Finance is page 30 to 32. A lot of the drops in there are related to the new software program. So if you recall, there was the big cost, but it was going to pay for itself over a number of years with reductions in contracted services and maintenance costs.
Greg, a number of the expenses are allocated from like water, sewer, and also from billing. How often do you look at that?
So the auditors do look at that every year. We pretty much keep it status quo because, like for finance, we're allocating my time, the accountant's time, payroll, because we're running all those services for the utilities, and it doesn't change that much year over year. Park and Rec does not allocate any time. Some of Public Works does based on some of their job duties if they're doing work specifically for the utilities. The board, the portion of their time goes there because they from time to time have sewer, water related issues, or so it does get looked at every year, but it really hasn't changed too much. I tweaked a little bit this year with mechanic and a few other positions, some of the the Public Works, just to get trued up with what people are actually doing. So
I was just curious because it hasn't changed in the last couple of years. That's why I'm just curious how often you look at it. So thank you.
Next department on page 33 is IT. A lot of the capital requests, these are just kind of your annual maintenance needs. So replacing servers, firewalls, those types of things. There's a long-range plan for that, and we don't want to be out of warranty on any of those items. And replacing, PCs as they come about. So those are just kind of the projects that have been out there. It's increased because that was funded through a different source last year. So that's why at the end you see why did it go up so much. It's taken out of a different fund last year that we don't have funds for this year. 38 and 39 is building inspection.
Greg, For a number of years, I've always asked code enforcement officer, has there been any thought in getting a permanent, full-time code enforcement or maybe a couple part-timers? Has that been discussed at all in the last budget? This budget, I should say.
That actually, Gary, is on, I have a list on my desk of personnel needs that I think we're in the future going to have to look at. And that is one. We've discussed that with Aaron and his team over there, and
I know it's been discussed, but, you know, I've been wanting something being done there for the last number of years, and I don't see any increase. And I know the budget's tight, don't get me wrong, but I just want to bring it up again to make sure that we take a look at that.
yep, it's on my list.
In that same budget, as far as building inspector, seems like there's an awful lot going on in the village that, how does one building inspector actually keep up with everything?
I'll let Aaron answer that.
It was just one building inspector until this week. Katie Lima was able to come back from maternity leave. So we do have 2 full-time building inspectors on staff. That said, Gary's point is well taken. There is a lot of activity going on in the village. And I think long-term, we do need to take a look at code enforcement and building inspection needs as a whole.
Legal services, page 40 and 41. It's the next line. And village hall maintenance, 42, 43. What this account covers maintenance for the village hall. So fixing anything that might break down, the electricity, the water, and then our cleaning contract for the cleaning services within the building. And then from time to time, there's a public works, personnel may come in and allocate some of their time if they have to spend any large amount of time fixing something or doing some work around here.
Who do we have our cleaning contract with, Greg? That used to always be a fun thing when I was the administrator.
Doug handles that. Let Doug answer.
Our cleaning contract is through Pro One. I think way back in the day, the village had its own maintenance person here. Then Pro One actually took over at that point in time. Lynn from Pro One was here, gosh, probably 15, 16 years. She retired, and we have a new team that came on board last year.
It's the same entity then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can we jump back a minute, building inspections? I just have a question on salary and wages, and maybe you addressed this and I missed it. It looks like it went down $23,000. The top line.
Mm-hmm. Health insurance is one area where I think we don't have number of people on it. It's just the wages where they might have been and where they are now. We had, prior to Katie, we had a different level of pay, I think, maybe with a more senior person. I'd have to look at the details, but it's a staff of 2, and those are, you know, the wages that they're currently.
So wages just maybe were adjusted for a new employee or something,
Correct.
so that's why the wages went down.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Page 44 and 45 is general government. This is kind of all the back office stuff, postage, copy machines. That also includes our insurance, the property liability insurance, workers' comp insurance. We had some favorable workers' comp numbers come through, so that's down a little bit. And then a property liability actually following more of a 2020 actual. So the rates didn't really change, but they were higher than we anticipated. So they kind of wash each other out. But this is kind of where we cover all of our utility bills and things like that.
Greg, as far as the bank fees and that go, I know what you definitely need is something else on your plate with the software changeover and everything, but have we thought about looking at the different banks that are within Ashwaubenon and maybe reaching out to them instead of Associated? I know Associated has now kind of left our community. They were here at one point. Just don't know where we're at with that, but I know that that'd be a long process to have to go through it and you have to do an RFP
that
and
would
all
be a
that.
full RFP, which, yeah, it's been, I think we did in 2012. It's the last RFP for banking services. So, yeah, we could do that. A lot of banks, the last time I recall, they can't collateralize the level we need, so it is limited to the number.
Yep.
But there certainly could be some within the village that could handle it, so yeah, that's something we could look at in the next year or two to do.
Okay,
Sure.
thanks.
And those fees fluctuate, so as our interest rates were going higher, then the fees were a little bit higher. So that's why, yeah, there's a little bit of that. And a lot of that's tied in directly to the Fed funds rate. So the bank doesn't necessarily control too much, but, they do, so.
Right, okay, thanks.
So then we move into public safety, pages 46 through 49. So this is obviously our biggest budget in the general fund. It's important to note that their capital items are in a different fund, in Fund 440, and we'll get to that, but in general, those capital projects that they have listed out there are a lot of the annual replacement type items, fire gear, bulletproof vests, tasers, pagers. We've been working with them, and Chief has been wonderful this year, and with the help of Randy and bringing a lot of new people of understanding what we've done in the past, try to smooth out a lot of those replacements. But this budget here is kind of the day-to-day operational. So if you have any questions, he certainly can help answer those.
Does the public safety contract prohibit moving to an HSA for the public safety end, or are they going to also move to just HSA?
They move.
They will move?
Tony, you can correct me, I don't believe that's not negotiable, right? The health insurance.
Okay.
They've always been very good with maintaining or using whatever plan we have. Everyone's on the same plan or has the same options.
Okay.
Everybody within the village.
A question for the public safety, one of you. Is that a typo? 1994 100-foot Pierce aerial platform truck? Is that right?
Yeah, that is not a typo, and we did have that refurbished here in 2020, if you remember.
I remember it being refurbished, but 1994, wow. I didn't realize it was that old. Did it come back okay for you?
Yes, and that'll actually give us another 10 more years with that vehicle.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Greg, is the Packers, you've got Packer parking in there, did they reimburse us for that?
Packer parking, or you mean Packer patrolling?
Patrolling.
Yep, so we typically get a $50,000 from the Packers on an annual basis for helping patrol the corners and other areas that they patrol.
So what about the rush center and expo center?
So if we work those events, we build PMI or Salcom if they have a run, or some of the other bigger areas, we build them for hour for the time. And then that shows up in overtime here, but then those are some of those revenue sources that we get charges for services that we see in the revenue section.
So it's an effect that it's a wash, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. For the PMI, the Packer game is not a wash. We spend more than we get because they just give us a set amount. So, and on a traditional year, this year's different, obviously. I believe we're billing this year for any time that we're spending this year.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
I just want to make a comment. Again, just compliments to the chief. I really respected the proposal you brought forth this year to have officers attend implicit bias training. And again, I just want to reiterate on the record that I hope that the village recognizes that implicit bias is not something that is exclusive to law enforcement, and I really hope to see some efforts to find some virtual trainings, perhaps, if COVID-19 persists for all staff. I know personally I've been taking advantage of some racial awareness trainings in the planning space, and there's a lot of webinars available for free right now. So this is something I'm pleased to see, again, in 2021 under public safety, but would love to see the effort across the organization.
That's another one of my lists for when we get our new village manager, one of the things we're going to be tackling, so.
Thank you.
Chief, did you have anything to add on your budget? Okay.
Well, it's been an experience for me, obviously, learning the department, the avenues that we're going down. This year has been an anomaly, obviously, 2020, so the budget was challenging for sure. But I do appreciate Greg. I mean, his communication with me has been phenomenal, and trying to understand what some of our needs are and how we accomplish that. So I think we've done a great job with the budget in that regard, trying to compromise what we can maybe part with a little bit or pull back on, and some of the things that we really need, like equipment and things like that. So I think it's been a great compromise between the two of us, or actually should be the four of us, quite honestly. And I also have other people, captains as well, that work on the budget. So I'm trying to make sure that everyone within the department has some understanding of what we do and how we do it. And so I can get kind of buy-in on that as well, to make sure that our organization is running as efficiently as we can. So again, looking for a normal year to kind of figure out where I can actually make some further cuts. But until I get that, it's kind of hard to tell right now.
All right, thank you. The next budget is fire inspection, page 5051. Again, the big thing, they had requested a full-time fire inspector, and that was just something that we weren't able to put through into this budget. So there's a need there as well, Gary, when we talk about different positions that are out there. I think you'll start to see more planning that way, and getting that out in front of you, in front of the board, especially to help understand those needs. So it's not just something that happens at budget time. So then we move into engineering on page 52, 53, 54. And then street administration on 56, 57. Really nothing changing there other than personnel costs. So that leads us into public works and sanitation. I want to just give this little comment that I do every year. So we have, how many full-time guys do we have total? 15? How many guys with the garage? 15 with 2 mechanics. And so what we try to do every year is, this budget, you'll see different cost lines, and we allocate time to different budgets, like curb and gutter, for example. It is based on actual trends, it's based on projected maybe projects, or sometimes it's just, it's roughly where we think we might have some cost. In total, the personnel for the rest of this public works is for those 15 and mechanics in total. So it's just how it gets allocated to different departments. So you may see like, well, how come this year it was really big and now it's down, or vice versa. Just trying to find averages. At the end of the day, it's the same crew with any kind of pay adjustments, and then this year we did add a mechanic, which is mostly just in the garage budget. But you get garage guys helping with snow at times, and you get park maintenance guys helping with this, and some guys helping parks with that, and so there's a lot of helping going on for other departments, but in total it's for the same number of personnel, but add the 1 mechanic. So as you go through this, if you're wondering why some areas might be looking kind of odd. So the garage, the street maintenance, the curb and gutter, the snow and ice, traffic control, street lighting, and sidewalk, the next number of pages, really, unless you have something specific, we kind of just go through as a whole. So if you have any questions specifically to public works sanitation, I'd ask if you could just direct those to Doug, or if Doug wants to make any comments.
I just want to jump in, Greg, on one item, and that's, you can ask questions on any of it, but the landfill item. As many of you have probably heard the news, Brown County is in the process of starting to build their own landfill. Brown County, Outagamie County, and Winnebago County all work together, and we've been all bringing our garbage down to the Outagamie County landfill. It's on 41, just outside of Appleton. That's got about another 1.5 years of life. Then Brown County's the next community up, or next county up, to build a landfill and start operations, and that'll be operational in 2022. With that, In 2022, they'll start ramping that rate up. It'll be about $2 per ton that'll be going up in '22. But the one item I wanted to bring to your attention, if you remember, 8 or 9 years ago, in terms of recycling, we were getting paid for our recycling. We'd be getting, gosh, at one point we were getting $22, $23 a ton for our recycling. About 4 years ago, that hit an end, and it went in the opposite direction. Last year, I think we hit roughly around $20 a ton that we were paying for it. At the beginning of this year, we were right around $28 or $29 a ton paying for to get rid of our recycling. That's still cheaper than the garbage rate. The garbage rate is a little over $43 a ton, so it still pays to recycle, because that always gets to be a question. Once you get close to that tipping point, what do you do? Good news is, over the past 2 months, it's I just got the email this week for November. It'll be $13 a ton payment. So we're going in the right direction. This budget assumes roughly a $20 per ton that we're paying. So again, based on that volatility, and what drives that a lot, our paper market's very good, but our plastic market is very overseas dependent. And if overseas does not purchase the plastic markets drop, and that jacks the prices up then. So I just wanted to, because you'll see it in the news a little bit more now over the next year as Brown County starts getting their landfill ready. And just so you know, that isn't just Brown County communities that are going to that landfill. It's called BOW, B-O-W. It's all 3 communities that go to that landfill, and we all share the cost and the revenues that come from it, which keeps our per ton cost lower than if you were to contract it out, if you will. That's what makes doing it yourself more affordable than contracting it out.
Anybody have any questions on Public Works and sanitation? I know it's a lot of pages to kind of scan through. Really not much difference in supplies and things like that. And part of the reason why these are all separated is there's reporting that's required by the state, and you have to break it down by these different categories. So that's why we have to have budgets. Because sometimes it feels like, why don't we just have an account called curb and gutter supplies? Well, because I need to allocate the time there, because that goes in a certain line item on a state report or things like that. And that helps with our shared aids and things like that as well. We'll get to it. We do have a new recycling truck, right? The recycling truck or garbage truck in the budget?
I believe it's recycling.
Recycling truck in the budget.
Correct, in the equipment replacement.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, if there are no questions, then we move into the Park and Recreation. So we've got a variety of departments there. We start with the administration side. And Rex, feel free if you want to make some comments to start, or if there's any questions.
We're pretty much towing the line from the last several years. There's been some decreases, especially in the community pool, just because we know there's going to be less people signing up due to some of the procedures and the way lessons are being taught during COVID. So, but we are trying to hold the line on the actual expenses portion of it. In terms of later on, we'll get into the special projects and whatnot, but those are pretty much off the board, except anything that could be funded through TIF or through park development funding. A couple of smaller ones through general, but we really cut back on those for 2021.
So after administration, we have the pool budget. And then the lake budget. We're projecting.
Hopefully next year we can have the lake open.
Yeah.
People really missed that this year.
So did Melody.
I was going to congratulate Melody for being elected the chair of the aquatic section for WTRA. That's great. It's nice to have someone out there seeing what's going on in state and keeping everything that we have going on up to date and training and all of that. So I'm glad to see you get involved in that.
it'll be easier to open the lake next year too, now that we've had almost a full year under our belts, you know, knowing all the different, I feel like we had to make that decision with only a couple months in this, and now
Correct.
seeing all of the things that you can do and the having things more readily available too to make accommodations or do those things. I'm hoping next summer, because this isn't going away, you know, things might look different still, but better than this summer.
Totally agree, Allison. I think the lake was closed more due to the unknown this year. And now that we've seen a full season of what can happen, what can't happen, what works and what doesn't work, we think we'll be able to, we hope, keep our fingers crossed, that we'll be able to have a season in 2021.
Well, and I think even when we made the decision, hand sanitizer, you couldn't even come by, you know, because we made the decision in May, and it would have maybe, and it started in March, you know, so we were in the very beginning, and I think it was the right decision, but I think now things have kind of settled, and unfortunately it is our new normal, but all accommodations and everything are simpler to find as well, so fingers crossed.
So the reductions that you put in for revenues for the pool, are they specifically just the lower numbers that you're having in there? Is that what you're figuring? You're still going to offer the same amount of classes or programs, but you're going to lower the numbers? Is that what you based it on?
So how the pool numbers are based on, Tracy, are specifically from January, for the lesson program, from January through May. So we're going to assume at some point in the summer that maybe we could get back to normal, but we know this, you know, because it's during the winter and there's not going to be a vaccine or anything available yet. We know January through May, we're going to have modified swim lessons. And modified swim lessons means for the younger kids, the parents have to get in the water with the kids. It's kind of like mommy and me or parent and me, but all the way up through level 2. And so not a lot of parents like to do that. So from the numbers that we're doing right now, we based the spring numbers off of, and the winter numbers off of the numbers we're having right now in the fall. And we know those numbers are definitely down a certain percentage. So that's the percentage we based our numbers off of through that time period.
So next department's adult recreation. We're on page 79, followed by co-sponsored and then youth. The next 4 pages. So.
I have to say that I did get calls this summer that the people were very happy with the fact that we opened up the programs that we did open up. So that was a plus.
Yeah, it definitely was allowed people to get out and do some things. And hopefully, you know, people were the ones that were willing to try things. Good comments or feedbacks regarding the safety procedures that we had in place. And both boys baseball and Ashwaubenon girls softball did a good job in their boards coming up with a back to ball type of plan of safety procedures of how they're going to handle where the umpires stood, you know, how often things are going to be disinfected, where the kids are going to be sitting in the dugout, how many could be in the dugout at one time. So they all worked on their own plan. And from my own observations and from what I've heard, it was a successful season.
Page 86 is park maintenance. Community centers, page 88, 89. And then page 90 is Performing Arts Center. If you're not aware, we share costs of the 2 staff members that manage the PAC.
I've got a question on that. Is the PAC, is the activity there down significantly, yet our expenditures are still at the same level? Is there something, there something that could be done there to rein back some of those expenditures?
They're strictly payroll expenses.
Correct. Yeah, I understand
Or
that.
if they have training. That would be something I think we'd have to discuss at a higher level. Because there's an agreement out there.
Okay, I'm just,
Right.
it's just, in certain areas I see in Park and Rec, we rein back certain things because of the lack of activity for obvious reasons, COVID. And in this one, we have not seen that. So I'm just a question. So.
Greg, I had a question asked some time ago. The PAC has a director there, and do they still have 1 full-time personnel there?
They have 2.
There's 2, a total of 2.
Yeah, and I can't remember the second gentleman's name. He's like a maintenance guy. That
I forget off the top of my head, but he's like the technical audio guy. So he does all the audio, the visual, kind of like an IT, but for
All right.
performing arts.
So there is 2 full-time people.
Correct.
And I know they did originally, when everything hit, they started pushing to fall, and then they kind of stopped at that point. And then the 3 fall ones they had booked, they had to push again to spring, partially also due to the fact that you have to have people willing to come. So I know, just because I sit on the advisory board, so I get emails and updates, but they're having issues on that realm too, of performers pushing and, looking at the feasibility of seating and things like that, so.
Are you on the PAC board knowing all that?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. We get update emails. I don't know, Mary, you get them too, I think, right?
Yeah, I get some, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been many, but
No.
when they do come out, they're pretty lengthy and.
Right, yeah, Kate's working on the different shows to try to see if there's anything that they can get in there. Like Allison said, there's questions as to whether or not the people will even come to the shows. Then there's, some of the performers don't want to perform,
And I know she said in the last update email, very few people who had bought tickets asked for refunds.
Right.
They're accepting that it's going to keep getting pushed, so they haven't lost a bunch. And that was in the last email, I think, and all the people they're working with, and now their new projected dates. And then they also have to go to the new projected dates. So I know they've adjusted it twice now. So.
I'll call Kurt and set up a meeting.
Page 91 through 93 is forestry. Tim is here if you have any specific questions, you might be able to answer, or Rex.
How is the removal of dead trees, the diseased trees, how is that, is that a long-term goal or short-term goal, or, I don't know, you get your hands full with that.
Tim's going to have quite the season coming up here in 2021. So on top of the normal duties, Tim is currently working on putting together bid specifications, which should be coming out here within the next month or two, for the EAB contracts for total removal of all the ash trees in the street right-of-ways as well as the park facilities, the open areas in the parks. Tim, how many are we talking about that are going to need to come down on this contract?
1,100 inventory sites, and then there's also the natural wooded areas that are adjacent to some of the trails in our parks too.
Yeah, as well as some conservancy areas where ash trees may fall on personal property. So it's a little bit of everything. So again, the goal is to get those bid specs out within the next couple of months, get contractors on board, and then that systematic removal would start next year in 2021. Those dollars have been bonded for already. So we're ready to go on that. We just are waiting to finish up the bid specs and get those mailed out to the potential bidders.
So Tim, do you anticipate taking all the ashes out street trees next year with that contract?
The street trees will be removed in 2021 through 2023. And then the stumping will be done the same year. And then replanting, if appropriate and desired by the property owner, will be done the following year. So in all, it's going to be a 5-year project. Street tree and park trees will be years 1 through 3, starting next year. And I can, Tracy, Steve, and Jay, I have a plan that was presented to the board back in March that details all the phases of that project, and that would be good information to review.
Okay, and I'm assuming that's also the communication out to each homeowner type of thing, and all that's built into that plan?
Yes, each property owner will be given an individual letter notifying them about what's happening and the timing of that, as well as replanting. Yes.
If it's not a street tree and it's their tree, are you doing anything with that? At least recommendations, things like that?
We will not be doing anything on private property.
Okay.
We do have a process or a procedure in place to deal with private trees that are impacting the health and general welfare of the public, but we will not be doing any actual work with private trees. We just don't have the resources for that.
Understandable. Thanks.
So Tim, is your contract going to include not only removals, but them contacting the residents, or is that something you're going to do internally and reach out to all the residents about what's going on with the trees?
We will notify the
You will,
residents,
so
the
the
village,
contract
yes.
will just be the removals and not any of the administrative end of it?
Yes.
Tim, I know in my district, in 9 and 10, there's quite a few ash trees that are out there right now, and they're really quite nice-looking trees, but even those are coming down, correct?
Yes, unless the adjacent property owner is actively treating them.
Okay.
We have a procedure in place to document that work. So we do have probably about 50 trees that are currently being treated by the adjacent property owners at their expense, and then we will not be removing those. But unless they are being actively treated, they will die from emerald ash borer at some point in the near future.
How much does that treatment cost, a ballpark?
It's approximately $10 per diameter inch, and that's the injection system, and that will protect that tree for 2 years.
It is a ongoing maintenance thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Definitely.
And as Rex said, we bonded for that in June for $1.4 million. That was a long-term plan we'd put together a number of years ago. Any other questions for Park and Rec, Forestry? Okay, we have page 94 is animal control. And then page 95 and 96 is economic development.
On this budget as well, it doesn't include health insurance? Is that hidden again? Do you think that?
Yeah, probably. It may not. Not everyone takes health insurance, so
Okay.
I'm going to check. I have a note to check all the lines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Greg, I can attest, life insurance isn't in that budget.
No, health insurance.
Health insurance?
Life insurance, health insurance, I'm sorry, right, health insurance, yep.
Thanks.
So that's the general fund. Any other questions on general fund? And I think what we'll do is we'll save a motion at the end to approve each fund when we're done, if that's okay, in case
Sure.
there's any need to come back and do anything. So we get into special revenue funds. So special revenue funds typically have some sort of funding mechanism to sustain themselves in some capacity, or in some case, they're unique and we wanted to segregate them out. So you'll see like the canine program, for example, there was a reason, instead of just burying that as a line in the public safety budget, we got the dog, we got the car, we wanted to keep that separate to kind of be able to track those funds. So in total is page 97. And then the first fund Rex alluded to earlier is the Park Development Fund. Those funds are through park impact fees from development, and they're to be used for help building up the parks, if you will, in particular neighborhoods of where that development is at. And there's restrictions tied to what the funds can be used for. But Rex has got a number of projects in here, so if you have any questions, or he can walk through those. The big one is the Sherwood Forest Pond. I think we've talked about that in the past. That's a split project. So if you're reading through that, using some park development because it's a new trail and a bridge, so it's something new. And then there's a cell tower in Sherwood Forest, and the agreement at the time was to take the proceeds for the first 5 years to be able to use for the park, some kind of park enhancement of some sort. So between those two, that's going to fund that project, which is a pathway around the pond in a footbridge of some sort, pond bridge. All right, the next fund is the donation fund. This one really is, we get various donations. So people come in, and so these are just kind of estimates based on trend. So if people want a park bench, or people want to donate to public safety for something, and then we use the funds as they are requested to be used for. The next four are all public safety programs. There's a canine fund, canine program. There is the DARE liaison program, Citizens Academy program, and the cadets program. So I'll kind of turn it over to public safety folks that are here if you have any specific questions on any of those. Or if they want to talk to them, certainly.
I don't need to talk just to talk, so if there's questions, please feel free.
Okay. If none, we have a fund called excess sales tax that is from the Green Bay Brown County Football Stadium District tax funds from the state. So we still are getting dollars trickled in. And so it's one of these things that we can use it for one of three purposes: property tax relief, tax levy supported debt relief, or economic development. So it's kind of a nice little drop fund that we did bring it up and talked about. Do we want to use this? I think maybe the thought was, let's keep this for next year. If we do have one of those situations where we lost something and we can tie something to one of those areas, we've kind of got a backdrop there. It could be used for incentives with a TIF project or in any other project as well. That's economic development. So it's always out there. We just haven't used it yet.
Greg, didn't we spend some of that money a couple years ago? Wasn't there a lot more?
There was, yeah, initially. There was the...
I forgot the number.
Yeah, it was 800,000-ish, somewhere in that ballpark. We used a bunch. In fact, in last year's budget, we allocated 600,000 between that, and we had some excess funds of prior years. We had used some of that to help with debt service for some of our debt service needs, the 300,000 that went over there. So yeah, we did use that in prior years.
So this is the balance of what's left?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And the last special revenue fund is our employee retirement fund. So this is where we allocate dollars for employees that retire and have vested accrual balances that we owe them as payouts.
Do we have an idea in 2022? I hate to ask that because I know those numbers are large numbers per employee.
There's always potential every year. Yeah, I think there are a number out there that could retire. Most people keep that fairly close to the vest. So if we start hearing about it, then we start, talking internally like, okay, we got to see where we're at because this fund is getting pretty low.
Okay.
This is a fund that we have funded over the years with, I think the first big one was when we closed TIF 2. We put a big portion of dollars in there. We're going to be closing TIF 4 probably in 2 years. This might be an area where we drop some of those funds. Or if we have excess fund balance at the end of the year, we've typically put some in the employee retirement fund. If we don't put money in here, then it has to come out of the general fund because it's due. So we're good. We have a lot projected for next year, as you can tell. So if those come true, those are some big ones. And then I think there might be a year gap, and then there's always people cycling through.
Yeah, I think budgeting on an annual basis, maybe a little bit bigger numbers as we go forward. I know we can't do it this year,
right?
But in years to come, plus, it was a good idea to use TIF $1, and the other TIFs coming offline now too. We'll need to take a good look at that.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
The next fund is our debt service fund. I've got on here on page 112 and 113 the list of all of our bonds out there, all the debt that we have, broken out by our general fund. So the first section that's not highlighted is paid with tax dollars, tax levy dollars. That's split between government operations and then the referendum. The majority of our dollars are still referendum. That's going to continue for a long time yet. Those referendum, that's the original referendum back in 2014. We had 3 different debt installments from that for the community center, community pool, and the auditorium that will continue, I think, through 2030 something or other. I think it might be 2036. Those are 20-year bonds. So that's out there for a long time. So that'll exist. The blue is TID 3 debt. The green is TID 4, and the orange is TID 5. Those dollars, those debt payments, the TIF districts, that increment, that tax that comes in, transfers dollars into this fund to pay that debt. That's not paid with a general tax levy. So I've got it all broken out. And then the last page on 114 kind of gives you the next 5 years where we're going to be at. The general fund drops about $350,000 from 2021 to 2022. So if we don't bond anything, that will help our budget. That's one of the cards in my back pocket, hopefully to help next year's budget. But things happen during the year, and we might have to bond. So, and then it lists out the other debt services that are out there. There's a big TID 3 debt retirement. It was a back-ended piece. You can see in 2023. That's why that sticks out. Any questions?
So is TID 3 the one that's going to be retiring next year? Is that correct?
TID 4.
TID 4?
That's the next one. It's more likely to be in 2022 at this point because we might keep it open to run a project. So our thought process there was, we could close a TID and then we'd have to bond for a project that we want to do or keep it open because TID 4 is self-sustaining, so it would be able to pay for a project that we otherwise would have to potentially bond for, and that's the Main Street trail. So it makes more sense to keep it open one more year, use those funds, then close it, and then have to borrow to pay for the project.
Steve, I think you've come full circle because I think you started TID 3 and TID 4, didn't you?
No. Oh, yeah.
I remember sitting with Steve. I just started here, and I had no clue what he was doing. He had colored paper all over the place, and it was a fun experience.
I was great with crayons, I'll tell you that.
I think I'm getting old too because I was here too for that.
I know. That's why I was going to say anything.
We never did get the segues, by the way.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway.
I don't know if I missed it. Where is that bonding for the trees? Is that not in here, or where does that show up?
On page 112, it's in that first section of general government. It's the last bonding in that section. It's
tree removal.
2020 0617 GO notes, and then the parentheses is EAB tree removal. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure.
I I would be remiss in not adding that Max Anderson, Dennis Duffy, and all the department heads
Yeah.
contributed considerably to that effort, and that's where the accolades should go, should have gone, should go.
Yep, good old Max.
Yeah, good old Max.
The next fund are the capital projects funds. So what we do is try to keep the general fund to be more day-to-day operational things, and then put over here more of the capital-related things. It's still primarily funded with tax levy dollars, but at least it splits it out. So we've got street construction is the first one. And I mentioned early, this is our mill pave program. You know, we repair certain streets. Doug can certainly answer any questions. We're able to maintain the funding line. We were hoping to add a little bit to it, but we weren't able to, but we kept it at the same level as 2020. So if you have any questions, Doug can answer those. If you have any comments, Doug.
On the street construction, are we still going with the $650,000 for 2021?
Yes, we're maintaining the same level. Yep.
Okay.
The next is our village building fund. That handles projects to this building, the garage, and other village-owned facilities. Doug, you want to talk about anything? If you have any questions, we've got a...
Yeah, sure, I'll speak to both of the items. As everybody saw, this year we completed the rehabilitation or reconstruction of the south parking lot that was done kind of in concert with the wrapping up the baseball field construction as well. We have next year the westerly lot, the lot out front here that we'll be redoing. That one's pretty straightforward. What we started undertaking this year, and was in this year's budget, was doing a spatial analysis of the village garage. That also took into consideration the cold storage building. There's a park and rec cold storage building, and a brief review out at Ashwaubenon Park, the storage building out there. Basically kind of plotting our course, if you will, for the next few years. Those facilities are all from 1994 and earlier, especially from where we're built right here. The facility out at Ashwaubenon, I think, is from 1902 possibly. But what it's doing is we went through all the departments, kind of got what their needs are in the future, including public safety. One of the items we forget is there's evidence storage that's needed. And so what we've done is we've developed a spatial estimate, if you will, of what we need for a building in terms of a building expansion of the village garage. We're in the process, the consultant's in the process of getting us what that estimated cost would be. That's something we'll have to discuss, because that's going to be a big number. Everybody knows the building expansion is going to be a big number. So that $80,000 you see in here is strictly if we would move forward with any design work. We still have to talk about that number and how we would manage that, when we would manage it, things of that nature. If we agree on that, then we would move with the design work. So I don't know that we'll be using any of that 80,000 next year. I think if we can work through just how we're going to situate that expansion project in the future, I think that would be quite an accomplishment. And then if we move forward with the design, we can do so at that point. But it's kind of that placeholder so that we have that ready to go if we move forward.
Then the next fund is the Park and Recreation Capital Projects Fund. And then Public Safety Capital Projects Fund.
So if I'm looking at this right, a lot of the public safety, it's simply replacement of expired equipment, a lot of asset replacement, it looks like.
That's correct. Most of it is, yeah.
Okay.
Was that previously, Greg or Brian, was that previously placed in the Public Safety Department and then identified as a capital project versus how it's handled now? Or has it always been handled like that? Like having it in the capital projects fund versus having it identified in the operation budget as a capital? Was it different at one point in time?
So, yeah, so at one point it was there, and then we were using other funding sources with it, and now I think it's just safe to keep it in here, because this year is kind of more just the normal stuff. There are other years where there's other bigger pieces. We've replaced SCBA tanks, we've replaced other equipment in there, other issues. So I think, again, it's just to help better see the projects, because when we're talking about a capital plan, which is a longer term, this is out there separately, and there's a plan in place. Okay. So that if there are those jumps, and we know to allocate the dollars specifically to this fund for 1 year, and then next year it would drop back down to the maintaining the existing equipment, if you will.
It's a little bit of 6 of one, half a dozen of another, right, where you put it. Okay.
I think it's just to identify it, keep it out cleaner a little bit.
Very good, thank you.
I always say that public safety's equipment expires, and we have to replace it so we don't expire. So.
The last fund in here, the Land Sales and Acquisition Fund, this was just to be used for, we could use it for a variety of things. We could use it for buying land, or we haven't had that opportunity if we ever had to buy land. Somewhere in here it was funded, we sold some land that we had. So we wanted to keep that separate, try to use that for something in the future. Then we have the 3 TIF funds. So let me say something about the TIF funds. Anything in here are just kind of estimates on projects we have out there. Before we would bond or do anything, we would come back to the board for approval on anything like that. So, we may not spend anything depending on what's going on, or there's a chance that means something's in the pipeline that we've talked about internally, but it would certainly come to the board for final discussion and approval. The actual increments coming in and the actual transfers out and are real numbers that we have to pay. Those transfers out into these 3 are going to the debt service fund to pay off the debt. So. If no questions there, then we move into the enterprise funds. So the enterprise funds are our utilities, water, sewer, stormwater. Sometimes if you read through here, in the numbers especially, it's a little bit different. These act like a private business. So they're village run, but they act like a village. They have their own rates and charges, and then so they're separate. They're never merged in the financials. They're always kept separate. And so that's why, because of that, Tom, to your point earlier, that's why we allocate time. So they don't have an accountant, so I do that for them. So therefore, the village can charge the utility for some of my time, things like that. So Doug and Steve are here if you have any questions with that. I know that from the water and sewer, we're just starting to find a service provider to do a full water and sewer review, which probably wouldn't kick in for probably not till 2022, the impact of any changes. So, but I'll let Doug and Steve talk to this.
Sure, I'll speak to the sanitary sewer utility and water utility. Steve can speak to the stormwater utility. Basically, in the water utility, of the total budget, about 80% of it is our source of supply, or our purchase water from the city of Green Bay, and our depreciation. There's about 20% that is operation maintenance. And it's even more so on the sewer utility, and I think it's 87% that is treatment of our wastewater and depreciation versus operation and maintenance. Both funds have a healthy balance in them. The sewer utility has had is a little easier rate review, if you will, and that's been done over the past years with the Green Bay Met doing some treatment plant upgrades over the past few years. Everybody in the area has had to adjust their rates accordingly. The water rate end of things, that's of course overseen by the Public Service Commission. That's a more intensive process. Like Greg said, we're in the process of starting that. We've been fortunate that we haven't had to have a rate increase on the water end of things since we connected the Green Bay Water in 2004. So we've got a great run out of that rate. Unfortunately, we're reaching that point where the rate increases from the wholesale water rate are catching us where we have to go through that rate review process. It takes about 10 months to go through that process before you have a rate in place. But what we want to do is we want to nibble away, if you will. We want to have small increases so that roughly in 2026, I believe it is our bonds will be coming offline when we connected the Green Bay Water Utility. That's when we want to start some of our infrastructure replacement projects. So we want to basically slide those dollar amounts in so we don't have a large rate increase. But to get to that point, we want to kind of protect some of the money that we have sitting and waiting for that. And that's where we're going to have the rate review completed this year. So just to give an overview of those two utilities.
In regard to water, Doug, real quick, the village of Wrightstown now is served through Ashwaubenon, is that correct? And how does that work out? And is there any funding that comes back to the village from Wrightstown?
Mm-hmm. So 3 years ago, I think the village of Wrightstown connected on to, I'll keep it as brief as possible. There's a pipeline that we connect into Green Bay, and that pipeline runs up to our tower at Marvell Lane, and there's another transmission main that runs out to the Glory Road tank, the two big tanks that you see in the village. When Wrightstown connected onto Green Bay Water, if you will, there was an estimate to construct another pipeline from Green Bay through Ashwaubenon to serve Wrightstown, or they could connect onto our pipeline, and as part of that agreement, we get paid what's called a wheeling rate. It's a rate that it's using our infrastructure, but not any of our labor or personnel or whatnot. It just goes to pay towards the principal of what was borrowed for that pipeline. And then in turn, there's in the water agreement with Wrightstown, there's only a certain amount that they can use. So they're basically using our excess capacity. And once that number hits, I think it's 1 million gallons a day. Once they hit that threshold, they have to develop a new way of getting the water from Green Bay to Wrightstown. Basically, what we didn't want to do is hamstring our future, whereby all of a sudden, if the village grew in leaps and bounds or got a big water user in, that we didn't have that capacity to use. So it's called a wheeling rate. So it's, I want to say it's 23 cents a thousand or something of that nature. It's based off of the amount you borrowed for that specific infrastructure.
I had a question too on meter readings. It sounds like I know Green Bay Water Utility is now doing all the billing for Ashwaubenon, is that correct?
Yes.
Do they do the meter readings as well as does the village still do that?
Our crews still do the meter reading, generally because you have to send work orders out then for any meter replacements or any rereads or things of that nature.
Okay.
Strictly billing that they do.
Okay.
Which is no small feat, in case anybody from Green Bay Water is listening.
Any questions for Doug? Any questions for Steve on the stormwater utility? Steve, do you have any, want to make any comments?
I just have a question. The total fund balance or net position is over $14 million. Is that just a bucket or what is that? Can you explain that on page 135?
So that's the total. Each utility has its own, right? So the total balance is just under 15 million, right? So each one, the water, like you're saying, our cash flow is good. It's coming down. So that's why we have to address the rate reviews. The stormwater, I think, has a lot of projects yet, and Steve can talk to those, and it's doing very well. But I think over time, the water has crept down. We like to maintain that because of if there are any major, something would happen like emergency level needs, we have the cash funding there to use. So we mix, and certainly for some of the projects, we don't have to then bond for all these projects over the years that we've been doing. We have the money available to do a lot of those projects. But I think our balances are healthy. I don't think we're not in trouble that they're too high. So you're not going to hear an auditor say, yeah, you guys are way above where you should be. They like where we're at. It's a healthy balance. We haven't had to bond for anything since we came online for the utilities, which is huge. So when we do the stormwater ponds and things like that, we're not bonding for them. We're using the funds available and managing with the fee structure that we have.
In regard to the stormwater, I know at our last village board meeting, Aaron had, we approved changing some of the densities as far as how much green space needed to be in whether residential or business areas. How is that going to affect the stormwater fund, or will that?
It really won't have an effect on the stormwater utility, Tracy. The basis of the stormwater utility is based on impervious surface. So each parcel in the village, we determine what the impervious surface amount is, rooftop, a parking lot, sidewalks, that's depending on what they have. So there's no limit from the stormwater utility standpoint. So it is what it is, that calculation. What I would add though is when we're talking about rates, when the utility was started back in 2012, we looked at future projects, what that budget would be, going, 15, 20 years out. So we started with a $50 per ERU equivalent runoff unit. That's the average residential parcel pays for the stormwater utility. So that number hasn't changed. We've been able to raise funds to do our projects since 2012. And looking forward, it's hard to say at this point, but there's several ponds that we still have to build. So when you build a pond and it costs $300,000 to $400,000, it takes a big chunk of funds out of our balance. We also have to acquire property too. The first ponds that we built since 2012 have been on parcels of land that the village might have owned. There's been some that we've acquired, but a couple years ago we expanded the Ashland Pond as part of the Bill Diamond in the Bill Diamond field there. There was some money donated to the park fund for that. But there was a cost savings, on that project. But moving forward, we've kind of grabbed at the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, on properties. Now we have to go out and acquire some properties, and there's some money that will have to be spent to do that, and then you build the ponds on top of that. So there's some funds that will, definitely our fund will be depleted, going forward. But that's why we're kind of hanging with that same, utility charge at this point.
Any other questions for the utilities? So the last group of funds are the internal service funds. What this means is this is our health insurance, dental insurance, and equipment replacement. Equipment replacement is vehicles. And so what we do here is the revenue source in here comes from the general fund and a chargeback back to each department based on their spend. So for dental insurance, an employee pays premium and the village pays a portion of that premium. That chargeback goes to the department by employee. And then obviously the costs are the costs of health insurance, dental insurance, and the cost of the vehicles, the depreciation on the vehicles. So the first fund is dental insurance. This has been fairly status quo since I've been here. I don't recall the last time we raised the rates on here just because it's got a very strong, healthy fund balance. Dental insurance across the board our insurance is pretty much the same as most. Coverages plans are pretty much the same across the board, so not much different here. Health insurance, like we said earlier, we're just going to the HSA plan. Overall, we think that it's going to help save money for the village, but there's a committee internally, health advisory committee, and it has representation from different groups within the village. And I think generally the consensus is we think it helps make better consumers, which in turn helps save you money as an individual. I know that's sometimes people don't want to believe that, but at the end of the day, the numbers don't lie, and we've seen that since we've started the HSA plan. So that's why we felt comfortable making that the only option.
So when you change to HSA, then, like Jay had mentioned before, there is no premium share for the employees for that plan.
Correct.
Is there any money that you're giving them besides the premium share?
No.
Okay.
No. And so this is something that's reviewed every year. And so because we're self-funded, if we have a really good year, we can talk about premium forgiveness, we can talk about not doing things, but we have talked about adding eventually, I'm sure there will be an employee premium at some point. It's kind of hard to avoid.
Yeah.
We try to avoid it as much as we can. So again, that committee talks, and we show all the statistics, we talk to our health consultant, advisor, and all that information goes in. It's not just a decision that I make or Mary makes, or it's a group, and it's an understanding to get buy-in so they understand, so they can go back to their individual departments and explain what's happening and why it's happening. So it's a process that has worked very well. I believe, Steve, you started that committee back in the day, so still moving and still works very well.
And just a quick question, Greg. So there's what level of plans do we have? Employee, employee plus spouse, employee plus children, and family? Or do we only have
We have
certain
employee plus one, and family.
Okay. And there's no premium share on any of it?
Correct.
Okay.
We've talked about doing multiple plans as well. I think it's one of those, we always try to take steps. Well, let's get to the here first, and then we can start splitting that in more details. But it gets confusing to some people, so maybe we will. It's something I'm sure that'll come up. That's come up a number of times. So.
Yep.
Then equipment replacement are our vehicles. And so in this budget, this is another area of cooperation, and I didn't honestly think we'd get a vehicle in. I didn't know how in the world it was going to work. And yet here you look at this, 2, 3, 4 pages of vehicles. Public safety has 4 vehicles. They initially, it says hybrid. My bad, I didn't delete hybrid. The original request was hybrid. Again, great cooperation and a lot of discussions, a lot of back and forth to try to come up with the best solution that works. Doesn't mean hybrid isn't an option in the future. We talked to our mechanics. We try to get a lot of feedback. I know the chief talked to the city of Green Bay because they have gone that route. So, it's something we'll look at, but this year maybe we'll just start without, see what the mechanics think, maybe get them training. There's a lot of pieces involved. So that's when we talk about the cooperation efforts. These are some of the areas, especially in vehicles, because everybody's got a list of vehicles. So we're in dire need. We do have a recycling truck. Those we just have to replace. They just hit a point and they're done. There's no exception. We tried that in the past. That didn't work very well. And then we've got engineering and public works administration. These guys have been driving around in vehicles that have been hand-me-downs of hand-me-downs for the years. We just need to catch up. They have a set dollar amount to go and see what they can get. I'm probably not getting new, but it'll be nearly new. So we have vehicles that are driving around with holes in the floorboards and things like that. We just need to kind of catch up on some areas. Public Works has a pickup truck, a couple general fleet pickup trucks to replace. Building inspection vehicles are old. They need to be updated. And then there's a blower attachment for the trackless, crosswalk, striper painter that I think they've tried to fix every year for the last 10 years. It's just old equipment. So these guys, Lee and his group back there, and public safety, they're driving around stuff that's pretty old and using stuff the best they can. And we trust our mechanics, and if they say, we're done with this, then we're done with this. They've done everything to try to make it work.
So in some of those vehicles, there'll be some street value to them. Are we going to outright sell them then? And where is that money going to feed back into this
That's
fund?
in here. So when you see that gain on sale of capital assets, 50,000, in the numbers on page 162, that's what those are. It's amazing what people will buy, and you think maybe we'll get 1,000, and we end up getting 3,000 because somebody wants it for parts or pieces, or so it's nice. It doesn't mean that we should have kept it necessarily. It's just that people out there, they've got hobbies, and so we do sell the equipment out on public surplus, and put out for the public to bid on it.
I have a quick question on some of the public safety vehicles. How do you determine the useful life of the vehicle? Because I see it, I'm just more curious. Some of them have a 3-year useful life, 4 years, and then one is 10 years old but has a useful life of 4 years. So I'm just curious how that's determined.
So we had a lot of discussion on that, and you know, I'd say 5 years, right? Because why do you need a new car? I don't get a new car. But they have reasons, and they get used, and they put on a lot of miles. And then we talk to the mechanics, and there's a point where they say, we're fixing this too much. It's not worth the cost of the annual depreciation is less than our maintenance. And so we're always trying to find that balance, and I think we did a good job this year. All right, this is what we're going to do. Here's our plan going forward, and then that'll allow us to, and then if we turn them around after 3 years, and if they're hand-me-downs at that point, then they're not, 4 or 5 years old, and they're more useful. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good discussion and understanding. It's high mileage. These vehicles, they're running, they're street miles. They're not necessarily highway miles either. So think about putting on. How many do you put on in a year in a patrol car?
Yeah, I think Spencer said we put out anywhere around 28 to 30,000 a year on the squad. So they're run just about every day.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to keep that in mind. And so what we're trying to do is figure out where's that balance between the useful life of the vehicle. Could it be used in other departments? And if so, then we don't want to run them to death. And then try to give it as a hand-me-down, and then a hand-me-down, and so forth. So Greg and I have worked together to figure out, based on the recommendations from the mechanics on what is the useful life of these vehicles, and then determine a schedule so we can make sure that we don't have 4 coming due every year. Maybe it's 2 or 3 or something like that. So we're trying to fine-tune that a little bit to make sure that we can maintain that schedule.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you that we have pushed back several vehicles this year. So in looking at some of the things that are going to be coming due, they pushed back an ambulance, a 2007 ambulance, from this budget to 2022. So that's going to be coming due. They pushed back, we helped push back a K-9 vehicle that was coming up to 2022 and 21. So we're trying to find that balance of what these other vehicles that are coming due, such as ambulances and things like that. How do we maintain that balance and not hit the budget all at once with some of these purchases?
And then does the same thing apply that are some things transferable? Because I'm assuming it's equipped with a lot of stuff. Is some of the stuff transferable into the new units, and then are you able to either, like you said, give it to a new department or sell it or anything like that?
Well, it's a good question, because all these manufacturers of these vehicles, for example, also have these other companies that supply our equipment, right? And so about every 5 years, Ford, for example, has to redesign the vehicle so we can keep these other companies in business as well. So, for example, our cages. When we get cages, usually those are transferred when we make purchases. However, in 2020, the redesign of our squad didn't allow for that. So the only way to sell those is at auction if people still have the old vehicles that they're using. So we do try to do that if we can at auction, but sometimes that's not always possible.
Gotcha. So it's a little bit of both. You can sell some, you can move some stuff, but you can't move everything, and you can't necessarily sell everything.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Chief, how many, including the 4 patrol vehicles listed here that you want replaced, how many do we have in inventory?
12.
Any more questions about the equipment replacement?
So if there are none, what I would recommend is that we approve the budget at the fund levels. If you approve the budget at each department level, then there's no ability to help departments out. If one department has a problem, you can, hey, I'm going to borrow some of your funds, if you will. But then we do everything at the general fund level. And it will come at the end of the year. If it's going to vary, I will come to you in December, hey, I'm projecting this, or we need to do this at the fund level. So there's always a word of caution to, if we approve as listed at the fund level, then that would be my recommendation.
So you'd be talking general fund, and then you'd be talking about special revenue fund, debt service fund, capital funds.
Enterprise funds and the
Okay.
Yep, internal service fund. Yes.
If we have additional questions in any funds, do you want them now or just before we take a motion on each fund?
You can ask anything you want, right?
Okay.
That's fine.
I just wanted to jump back into departmental funds for 1 second. I just had a question on how the legal department works. Does it bill back to departments, or is it just sort of known up front that needs by department ebb and flow year to year?
I think it's a mix of both. Yeah, some things I believe are charged back to departments, and then other things that just may come up as part of whether it's real estate expenses, recording fees, title, things of that nature. So it can be generally a mix.
The reason I ask is, obviously I worked in government as well, and we are 1 year ahead of Ashwaubenon in our transition of the clerk treasurer and separation of that role. And an area we absolutely underestimated the cost and time investment of was modifying the code to reflect both the separation of the clerk and treasurer duties between a now appointed clerk and the same exact situation, taking those treasurer duties under our finance director, to actually modify the code and then change process in every single instance where it referred to clerk treasurer was a major undertaking. And in our case, it actually ended up hurting us because we didn't have enough hours budgeted in our legal department for it. So I know it's a little late now, but it's just something that we definitely underestimated how time consuming it would be.
Allison, what community are you with? Do you work?
Kaukauna.
Kaukauna, okay.
In Kaukauna, do you have a on-staff attorney?
Elected, but budgeted as a full-time staff member.
Okay, so it's okay.
Salary or hourly?
Salary. Right. But paralegal staff is hourly.
Okay.
It's just something I just wanted to bring up, that it might be an area that we end up spending significantly more time on. If we don't bill back to departments, it shouldn't have any ramification on the clerk's department.
Yeah, I don't, we've handled all those sorts of things internally, and I don't foresee an issue in that regard.
Okay, any other questions?
All right, well, I'll make the first motion. Great job, everyone, all department heads, Greg, everyone. I know it's not fun. I'm not lucky enough to be involved in that in my work life yet, but I'm totally okay with that. So thank you, everyone. So I will make a motion, and Greg, tell me if I'm doing this wrong, to approve the general fund for 2021 as presented, and just approve the general fund at this point, right? Because you said approve at the fund level?
Well, you could just say I approve each individual fund as laid out and do it one motion.
Okay, then I'll make a motion
Otherwise, you could do 7
to
motions, yeah.
approve the 2021 budget as presented. Can I just do it that way?
Is that what you want? Or
The general fund, the special revenue fund,
debt service fund?
the debt service fund, the capital projects fund, enterprise fund, and internal service funds as presented for 2021.
I'll
Okay.
second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Does everybody understand it?
I would like to echo Allison's comments. Looking over this budget, I think you guys did a tremendous job. It's very easy to follow. it really flows nicely. I think Greg and Mary, you guys did a great job with the department heads, and it's a great budget document. Thank you.
Yeah, I as well. Coming in new
Yeah.
and picking this up, having done other budgets before, this is fantastic. I compliment all the department heads and all the work in your department and everything and all the hard work that's been done on this. It's an unbelievable document and easy to find, easy to follow. It's a great job.
Thank you.
Is there any room in the budget for an Ashwaubenon coffee mug for Allison Burnett?
I have one in my office.
I want a zip off.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Everybody understands it? Any more questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Thank you to everybody, and again, thank you to all the department heads. Greg did an excellent job. Okay, so. Yeah. So you need, I'll let Chris do that.
Define it.
Oh, yeah. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the Finance and Personnel Committee.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Okay, Finance and Personnel you're released.